everybody. It is time once again for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnick.
And Chip, we had an open date this week for the second time this year. We're done. We're done with open dates, and now we can just have Buckeye football every week.
Looking forward to it. It was just a brutal weekend for football. Let's face it. I mean, in a lot of those games, it was something was better than nothing, but it was just not very appetizing to watch some of those games on Saturday.
Yeah. Did you? What were your big watches of the weekend without the Buckeyes on?
Well, at noon, I took it as an opportunity to look at two of Ohio State's upcoming opponents. The Maryland-Michigan game. Mm-hmm. That was about as scintillating as watching paint dry. And then I watched some of the Florida-Georgia game. So neither of them really were, as I said a moment ago, truly appetizing.
Yeah, it was. I did the same. I kind of flipped a little though too. I think I watched a little of a lot more games than normal, and not as much of as some of the games that I would normally watch. I would normally zero in on one and then only maybe flip over at halftime or during commercials. But this one I was flipping all day, and I got to say I was impressed by the way Maryland could move the football, but then they would get to the 20-yard line or so and then act like they'd never played the game of football before. And then, it was interesting to see how many, I was even the score was the same. At one point, I think it was 38-7 midway through the fourth quarter, I want to say, and every Michigan defender that starts was still on the field. And I was thinking, when Ohio State did that against Wisconsin, we saw a lot of backups.
Yeah. I mean, it just kind of, as you said, Maryland they were able to move the ball, but they weren't able to cash it in for any points. Mm-hmm. And it just kind of made you wonder, okay, well, how bad are the Terrapins, and has Michigan really improved that much? I mean, it just kind of left you puzzling, as to what the actual result is of that kind of a contest. But yeah, Michigan, they didn't look overly impressive against a team that was blown out by a number of other teams within the Big Ten.
Yeah, that was my takeaway too, and especially the way Maryland was running the ball in the first half. I thought they ran the ball pretty well on them. It wasn't very. It wasn't as dominating a win, and maybe some of that was coming off of a so-called rivalry game, a big emotional game against Notre Dame. Notre Dame. I did watch most of the fourth quarter of their game against Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech stopped being Virginia Tech and allowed Notre Dame to come back in that game. So, the media can continue to pretend that Notre Dame's a good football team because they end up getting the win late in that game, although Virginia Tech, I mean, when you think of Bud Foster and Virginia Tech, you think of, aggressive defense and overwhelming and stifling and running to the football and all that. And when the game was on the line, what Virginia Tech did was rush 3 men and drop 8 into coverage. And the 3 men that they rushed couldn't get anywhere near Ian Book. So even a mediocre quarterback is going to eventually find somebody open if he's got 12, 15 seconds in the pocket.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame, I think they should count their blessings that they were playing against a very mediocre Virginia Tech team. As you said, defensively, they're not what they used to be. And the ACC can take solace in the fact that Notre Dame will take one of their coveted bowl destinations from another ACC team, because that conference overall is not very good.
It's funny because even the announcers were like, "Oh, I expect Bud Foster to bring an extra guy here, or to blitz maybe in this situation." And every single play down the field, I think he might have brought 4 on one play. Every other play on that drive that was a pass play was a 3-man rush. And, at some point, change something up. You're not getting near the quarterback, so you can't cover everybody for that long. So you're just giving up chunk plays. And if you let them in the end zone, you lose the game. So I don't know. Call me crazy. Call me like a ultra super aggressive coach. but I think at some point I would have done some type of blitz, maybe bring 5 guys once, and maybe then 3, and then 4, and then kind of maybe changed it up a little bit, because it's not the same thing as playing a prevent where you've got a 2-score lead, there's 4 minutes left, and you know that all you have to do is really kind of make them run out the clock. This drive is the one we need to stop, and they let him come right down the field. It was baffling from a coach like Bud Foster to not bring extra guys at some point. It was clearly the Irish will take that gift.
Absolutely.
All right, so why don't we start this week's show with our trip around the Big Ten, because it's a short trip this week.
Yes, a very short trip.
Yeah, the football powers that be gave most of the conference the week off. I was able to watch some of the Nebraska game against Purdue, and I cannot begin to tell you how awful Nebraska's defense is, because all they had to do late in the game was shut down a third-string Purdue quarterback and couldn't do it.
Yeah, well, help me out here, because I was, again, we were just kind of talking about some of the games that I saw, and I was flipping that one on, and we had a family get-together in the later afternoon, so I didn't actually see, how that – I know that Purdue won, but was Plummer – I mean, is he out for the season now, or what's the injury that he sustained for Purdue to have to bring in Aiden O'Connell?
Well, that was one of those things where I was flipping and I didn't actually see the injury, but I did see Plummer limping around, and apparently hurt his right ankle. I'm not sure. I think Jeff Brom said after the game that it's probably the rest of the year, but. The weird thing was, Nebraska was in fantastic shape. I mean, Plummer had a pretty good day, 25 of 34, 242 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he also threw 2 interceptions. Aiden O'Connell came in, and the game's on the line, and Nebraska was not getting pressure on him and was not covering any receiver. O'Connell went 6 of 7 off the bench cold, and I don't know how many reps he could possibly have had, but he got him down the field, and then they called a bit of a trick play down near the goal line, scored on a bit of a reverse, and won the game 31-27. It was a pretty good day offensively for Nebraska. They didn't run the ball, great. Wan'Dale Robinson also was banged up in this game and had to keep coming out. And then Purdue came on and won it late with their third-string quarterback, and it was it just showed you it was just a great illustration to me of how far the Nebraska defense has fallen.
Well, Nebraska, I mean, their season is on the brink. I mean, they're 4-5, and by and large, the upcoming games that they have, I know that they're off this coming weekend, but considering they still have Iowa to play. They, by and large, I mean, Nebraska, they're looking at, being home from the bowl games situation for 2 years in a row. As far as Purdue, compliments to them, like you said, their third string quarterback coming in cold, rallying the team to victory. And I know that Purdue this coming weekend, they get to play against Northwestern, which is really hit rock bottom. So they might, I'm not going to go so far to say that they're going to get to a bowl game, but they might get very, very close.
Yeah, Purdue right now 3-6, 2-4 in the Big Ten. Nebraska also 2-4 in the Big Ten, 4-5 overall. The Huskers need 2 wins to become bowl eligible, and it's kind of hard to figure out where they're going to come from if they can't play any better defense than that, because they're going to play against better defenses than Purdue's as the season goes on. A good day for J.D. Spielman, 6 catches for 123 yards. Adrian Martinez, he threw for 247 yards. He threw an interception, and the interception he threw was really bad because it was he telegraphed his pass and it was in the red zone, and I think it was intercepted at like the 3 or 4 yard line, and it was just it was brutal. But Nebraska goes down, and we already talked about Michigan beating Maryland. The final there was 38-7 at Maryland. Shea Patterson threw for a whopping 151 yards and a touchdown. He was 13 of 22, and their leading rusher was Hassan Haskins, who had 60 yards. So, basically what Michigan has brought back is they're running the ball a little bit, and they're willing to now throw the jump ball to Nico Collins a couple times a game.
Yeah, I know that Gerd in his Michigan Monday column referenced how that should just be a staple of the Michigan offense. Just to, what are the odds that Jim Harbaugh and his offensive coaches are reading the Michigan Monday column and getting some inspiration from Gerd. But you referenced Michigan running the ball. One of the other things that Gerd brought up, I thought, was a really good point about the Michigan running game. You referenced Hassan Haskins running for only 60 yards. And that was enough against a Maryland team. Now, granted, there were other, True Wilson, Zach Charbonnet carried the ball for Michigan, but the mere fact that Michigan, they were able to rush as a team for 155 yards against, Maryland has, like Minnesota a couple weeks ago crushed them. They basically doubled. Minnesota had 321 yards on the ground against Maryland. So it just goes back to, all right, well, is the Maryland defense improving, or is the Michigan running game improving, or what is it's the reason why I'm kind of stammering over this is that until Ohio State plays both teams, you're really not going to know kind of what you're facing there. But yeah, Michigan, I think that they figured out that their secret to any kind of offensive success is establishing some semblance of a running game, even if it only gets you 155 yards.
Yeah, it was not a great performance from Maryland's quarterbacks. They combined to go 10 of 22 for 104 yards and an interception. It was basically when Maryland didn't run the ball, they were in trouble. And I thought they did a pretty decent job in the first half of running the football, but as the game wore on, they were not able to do it quite as well. They became a little bit more predictable, and Michigan kind of zeroed in on what they were doing, and they finished with 46 carries for 129 yards, 2.8 yards per attempt, and but a lot of that was Josh Jackson running for minus 32 yards. And, other than Anthony McFarland Jr., who had 60 yards on 14 carries, there wasn't a whole lot there. So, it was they were doing a good enough job, I thought, early. But once they fell behind because they weren't able to score when they got into scoring position, it really played into Michigan's hands.
And I know that Maryland, just as a change of pace, and I'm going to probably mispronounce this young man's name, not intentionally, obviously, but they have a freshman quarterback, Lance Legendre, that when he came in, it was very, very obvious, all right, we're going to run the ball with him because I think, he is a dual threat guy. He only threw 2 passes, only completed one of them. So like you said, throwing the ball was obviously that was as inept as Maryland was showing themselves. The passing game was, that was exhibit A, if you will, of how poor Maryland was offensively against Michigan.
Yeah, they really were. They only put up 233 yards, and Michigan only put up 331 on the 80th ranked defense in the country. That's not really that good. No,
and so I know we'll talk about Maryland in greater detail when we get to the Ohio State side, since they're playing the Terrapins this weekend. But the mere fact that Michigan wasn't able to put up a lot of yards and a lot of points, more than the 38 that they did, just kind of makes me wonder, has Michigan really improved that much, or are they just kind of regressing to are they playing down to their competition?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought after watching Notre Dame and Michigan, I wasn't able to tell, is Notre Dame this bad, or is Michigan running the ball better? Because I did think that they had some success offensively in the second half against Penn State, and I don't know how good Penn State's defense is. But then watching them play Maryland, it's clear to me that either Maryland has a better defense than Notre Dame, which is kind of mind-boggling to even think about, or Michigan just isn't really that good of an offense. And I think that they should be able to put up a lot more yards on a defense that's ranked 80th in the country. So I don't think that they're going to feel great about that game, but it is a 31-point win. They do get to move on. They're 7-2, 4-2 in the Big Ten. Maryland falls to 1-5 in the Big Ten and 3-6 overall. They will not be going bowling, and unless something crazy happens, and it will appear to be a wasted year for the Terrapins. And I mean, if they thought they were going to have trouble with Michigan's offense, I mean, I don't know what they're preparing for this weekend.
Yeah, well, like I said, I think it's going to be interesting to see how Ohio State handles this game. I mean, when we get to that portion of the podcast, I have some thoughts. Not that Ryan Day is going to be looking to you and I for offensive innovation or strategy, but
in your opinion,
in my opinion,
yeah.
Again, just purely one man's opinion. But personally, I think, as you said a moment ago, that Maryland they had difficulty against a Michigan offense that, let's face it, has been tremendously inconsistent at being able to run the ball. Has been, very, very poor overall at passing the ball. So what are they going to do when they face against a team like Ohio State that's equally effective at both?
Yeah, I think I guess the biggest compliment I can give Michigan right now, the way they're playing, is they're playing with toughness, and that's really been enough to get them by against inferior competition. But honestly, they haven't impressed anybody. But they've kind of taken on the sort of the persona of their coach, Jim Harbaugh, from when he was a player, and they're just being tough, and they're just doing enough to win.
Yeah, and for right now, that, as you said, that might be enough. Against Maryland, they have this coming week. They actually have their bye week coming. Michigan does this coming week before they play Michigan State. And in all fairness to Michigan State, that might be enough for Michigan as well, to play with just that toughness, to have their leading rusher only run for 60 yards. We'll see. I just think, when they start to play against better competition, because guess what? Better competition is coming. We haven't talked yet about Indiana, but in my humble opinion, that is going to be a very, very good test for the Wolverines the week before they play Ohio State.
All right. Well, Michigan State, their offense is terrible. That may play into Michigan's strengths, but they were off this week. The Spartans were. Let's go to Champaign, Illinois, where the Illini, Chip, are one win away from bowl eligibility after a 38-10 win over Rutgers. Getting it back on defense, or getting it done on defense. Couple defensive touchdowns for the Illini. This game was only 10-10 at the half, and the Illini won the second half 28-0, largely on defensive touchdowns and Rutgers' ineptitude. I mean, we're used to the latter. We're maybe not used to Illinois scoring a bunch on defense.
No, Illinois. I congratulate the Fighting Illini and Lovie Smith for being able to keep going forward. I thought after that Wisconsin win that I thought that they would have a tough time handling prosperity, and they've proven me wrong. The fact that they're one victory away from bowl eligibility, and I didn't listen to, but I saw on Twitter earlier in the day that when asked about this game upcoming for Illinois, because they're going to be playing this coming week against Michigan State in East Lansing. Lovie Smith did not shy away from the fact that, this is the biggest game that we have played in since I've been here. I mean, he wants his players and team to feel the, I guess the circumstances and the what could possibly be at stake with earning a bowl bid with a 6th win. Personally, I think Illinois, regardless of what happens this weekend, I think they're going to get that 6th win because they do have to play Northwestern at the end of the year. Rivalry game. That's where I think they get magic number 6. But Illinois, they've certainly. It's nice to see compared to most people had punched Lovie Smith's ticket out the door from Champaign, and he's certainly shown that the Illinois are going in the right, that the Fighting Illini are going in the right direction.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. They beat Rutgers, Chip, with a quarterback who went 6 of 11 for 120 yards and a touchdown, no interceptions. But really, Illinois has been doing it with the running game. They did run for 204 yards as a team, but their leading rusher only had 51 yards. It was Reggie Corbin. Brandon Peters, the quarterback, had 3 carries for 41. Dre Brown had 8 for 31. And Rayvon Bonner had 4 for 26. Really a running back by committee. Nobody in particular did a whole lot, and really it was the Illini defensive scores that kind of turned this game on its head.
And you'll have to forgive me because I did not tune in to see what sounded like a barn burner of a game between the Scarlet Knights and the Fighting Illini. But based on my previous exposure to former Wolverine quarterback Brandon Peters, the fact that he was able to have a long run of 54 yards, that obviously the Rutgers defense must have been not only horribly out of position, but it must be dreadfully slow for Brandon Peters to be able to scamper for 54 yards.
Yes, and his other 2 rushes combined were for minus 13. Which
yes.
may have been sacks. I didn't watch the game, but
right.
I would guess that would be the case. So the Illini, they've got a little bit of a winning streak going. They're kind of on a roll, and they're 3-3 in the conference, 5-4 overall. They've got a winning record. Good for Lovie Smith. Illinois has been kind of a joke, and he's making them more difficult to beat. And that's really the first step for a program to turn things around is stop being a pushover and start being a tougher out. And then you can eventually get that belief and get a few, maybe get a couple better recruiting classes and start to turn that around and turn it into a winning program that goes to bowl games, more often than not. And that's kind of what Lovie Smith's charged with doing. I don't think any of us thought he would this year, but it looks like he's going to get it done. And meanwhile, Rutgers going, they're 2-7, they're 0-6 in the conference, and really, when you look at the way this team plays, it's amazing they won 2 games.
You're not kidding. I mean, the mere fact that a couple weeks ago when they won their 2nd game, that a lot of people thought that was kind of a minor miracle when they beat Liberty. That is a program that I think just started playing football at the D1 level or the FBS level, I think in the last year or two that they moved up. So Rutgers, they're definitely the rehiring of Greg Schiano, if the Twitter rumors are to be proven accurate, cannot come soon enough because they need to do anything and everything possible to try and have some kind of positive energy and momentum breathed into that program.
Yeah, speaking of bad teams like Rutgers, Northwestern absolutely pummeled by Indiana 34-3. It was not a close game. It was 10-0 after the first quarter. It was 24-3 at the half, and Indiana just basically romped. It was Stevie Scott, the third, had a decent game, 26 carries, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns. Michael Penix didn't have a great game. He was only 10 of 15 for 162. But Northwestern just continues to be a really bad football team this year. They are 1-7 overall, 0-6 in the Big Ten. Chip, they have a worse record overall than Rutgers.
And who would have thought that I'll be honest. I mean, like a year ago, not even close to a year ago, this is a team that I don't want to say that they scared Ohio State, but they definitely showed a lot of toughness and a lot of heart in the second half of the Big Ten championship game against Ohio State, a little less than one calendar year ago.
Yeah.
And now they're looking up from the basement of the Big Ten at 1-7 and no end in sight. So I don't know what Pat Fitzgerald does. I mean, he's not in danger of losing his job. I'm not trying to suggest that, but he has to do something differently offensively. I mean, he can't stick with the status quo.
Exactly. It's, I remember you and I did our preseason podcasts, and what do you got going on there? You got some kind of paper wrapper or something?
I was just opening up a handful of gummy bears. Sorry about that.
All right. No, I mean, I hear it only when I talk, and I'm thinking, is that something that's going on my end? But you eat your gummy bears. Hopefully, they don't make you have that squeaky, high-pitched voice like they do on the commercial.
I'm not like that kid. If anything, it was just some leftover Halloween candy that I pilfered.
All right, you're not gonna fly them into your mouth.
No,
and you don't like the red ones because they're more gooder. All right, so. Yeah, you and I spoke on the preseason podcast when we sort of broke down the Western Division of the Big Ten, and I think both of us thought, you can't count Northwestern out, and I think you can count them out now.
Oh, yeah, they certainly at 1-7, they're certainly looking forward to beginning their off-season winter conditioning sooner than most of their Big Ten brethren. But yeah, I never thought that it would be this dreadful of a season for the Wildcats.
I mean, I think you picked Nebraska, if I recall correctly, and
yes.
I took Iowa, and we both talked about how Wisconsin could make some noise, and Minnesota could make some noise, and Northwestern can't count them out. And it's obviously the Nebraska pick isn't looking good. The any consideration we gave Northwestern isn't looking very good at all. Iowa and Wisconsin are each 2 games behind the Minnesota Golden Gophers. But Chip, the Golden Gophers going to get their first real test this year, this weekend, as Saturday at noon, the Gophers are hosting Penn State. So one of the unbeatens in that game is going to no longer be unbeaten.
Yeah, and I feel bad that it's at the same time as the Ohio State-Maryland game, because obviously where my attention is going to be almost exclusively fixated upon. Mm-hmm. Maybe during the commercials I'll flip over to see what's going on, but I don't know. Part of me just thinks that Penn State offensively is just going to be too much, but then again, Minnesota really in these last few games has been very dominant, unlike their early season squeaker victories that they had. So I'm happy for PJ Fleck, because I've said this before. I kind of thought of him as being, very much kind of, like a snake oil salesman, with all the rah-rah and all, the row the boat and all this. But the mere fact that he has Minnesota at 8-0 this and playing against a high-quality opponent like Penn State, I think that speaks volumes to the kind of program he's building up in Minneapolis.
Yeah, this is, to me, I'm with you. I mean, it's Big Nude Saturday for the Buckeyes playing Maryland on Fox, and Penn State, Minnesota will be at the same time on ABC. And I'd really like to see that, because I'd really like to see the matchup of the Minnesota run game against the Penn State defense.
Well, that's it. I mean, because Penn State, I think you've been hitting it right on the head, that Penn State running the ball has not really been their strong point. When it comes to Minnesota, that's, like they're defensively, they've been, very, very solid. And Minnesota, that the way that they offensively have been performing has been on the strength of their running game. So we'll see. I mean, I think Penn State, I'm not sure in terms of what the gambling line, the
6.5. Penn State minus 6.5.
Okay, I'm not a gambler, but I think I always tell people there's a reason why there are all these brand new shiny buildings always going up in Las Vegas. And I'm just not I'm not comfortable with putting money down. I just think this should be a really tight game because obviously Minnesota, the fact that they're 8-0 but still ranked 13th, this is kind of indicative of the lack of respect by the media and the coaches as to why they're ranked that low with that undefeated record. And as far as Penn State goes, I think there's still some skepticism based on the fact that they almost allowed Michigan to come back and beat them in their whiteout game a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I think this is a game that if Minnesota wins it, I don't think they lose the Western Division. I mean, I think that they still, of course, have to. They host Wisconsin. That's a potential loss. They still have to go to Iowa, and they have to go to Northwestern. But I think if they're good enough to beat Penn State, I think they'll be fine, and I think they'll hold on and win that division.
I think you might be right because that's the kind of thing psychologically that would allow them to springboard against other quality opponents, like you said, against Wisconsin and Iowa for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, they'll be jacked up there because they're playing a top 5 team. Penn State's ranked 5th as we head toward this weekend. We don't have the as you and I record, we don't have the college football playoff rankings, which come out Tuesday. We don't have those yet, but Penn State ranked 5th in the country in the what I like to call the normal polls. So,
yes.
Purdue will go to Northwestern. That's also at noon. That's on BTN. I don't know what the line is. I don't know that it matters. It's not going to be great football, and Purdue will probably win that football game.
I would think so. I mean, even though they're going on the road to Evanston, and Purdue. I mean, that has to be basically a pickup game because, as you said, Purdue's down to potentially their third string quarterback. Northwestern offensively has just been dreadful, and now you're looking at all right. Who's to say that? I think Purdue's had their share of injuries. I mean, I really couldn't begin to tell you in terms of who would be favored, but I would just have to go with Purdue because I think the mere fact that they were able to bring in their third string quarterback, as you said, cold off the bench against Nebraska and go to victory, I would give the edge to Purdue, but it's certainly going to be by a lot.
Yeah. The Illini will travel to East Lansing and look to get bowl eligible, and that game's at 3:30 on Fox Sports 1. And I ordinarily you would even entertain that Illinois could go to Michigan State and win, but with the way Michigan State's offense is sputtering, I mean, Illinois just probably has to score 21 points to win this game.
Yeah, and as you said a few moments ago when talking about Illinois, their path to victory against Rutgers was largely sparked by their defense. So what if they're opportunistic against that sputtering Michigan State offense and they're able to create some turnovers, possibly like a pick six off Brian Lewerke? Who's to say? But I think Illinois could make that game very, very interesting, and that might be all that Lovie Smith needs to get that elusive 6 win and that bowl bid.
The line for this game, Chip, is amazing to me. Michigan State minus 14.5.
That has to be that the respect for the home field advantage has to be a big part of that, because anyone who's seen Michigan State play offensively would say there's no way that this team, they might not even score 14 points.
Yeah.
But it has to be because of the home field and respect for Michigan State's defense, which, let's face it, they gave Ohio State a good challenge in the opening quarter when Ohio State and Michigan State played earlier this year. Mm-hmm. So that has to be they're probably thinking, okay, they're going to clamp down on Illinois' run game because they can't really throw the ball. Probably looking at low scoring. But yeah, I mean, it would not be surprising to see this one, be like kind of like in the last second, like on a last second field goal or something like that for whoever to win it.
Yeah, I'm not a gambling guy either, but I would be tempted to take the points there and bet that Illinois could keep that close at least, if not win it outright. So Anyway, we shall see. Like you said, they put up their shiny buildings, and they're very expensive, and they can do that for a reason in Las Vegas. The other game is Iowa at Wisconsin, the number 18 team in the country against the number 16 team in the country. They have identical records at 6-2 overall, 3-2 in the Big Ten, and Wisconsin is an 8.5-point favorite.
I can see that just based on the mere fact that it is Camp Randall. This will be I guess their first. I mean, they were off last weekend, so their first game at home in several weeks, because they lost on the road to Illinois, then they lost on the road to Ohio State. So this is that makes sense to me that Wisconsin is favored. Maybe not by 8.5, but definitely I can see why the Badgers are the favorite.
Yeah, they're coming off 2 straight losses. Their last win was against Michigan State, 38-0, and they're going to be playing a team that's, I think, in a lot of respects is similar to Michigan State in the Iowa Hawkeyes, but I think the Hawkeyes are better. They've shown themselves to be better offensively, maybe not quite as good defensively, but really all it comes down to if the Hawkeyes can't contain Jonathan Taylor, and so far this year there's only been a couple teams that have been able to do that. It could be lights out for Iowa. Certainly, whoever loses this game is out of the Western race.
And with Iowa, I mean, I think they are even more, I guess you could say, I don't want to say predictable, but they are even more reliant on, I think just, like their running game, because I know how affectionate you are towards Nate Stanley's passing ability, that, I think if they're not able to run the ball, I think it could be, a very difficult game for the Hawkeyes. So I'm going to definitely go with the Badgers this one. I think Camp Randall, I think Jonathan Taylor is going to have a rebound game. So I definitely like Wisconsin to win this one. But as you said, the loser in this case, in my prediction being Iowa, I think they are going to be removed from the Big Ten West contention.
Yeah, I would not be surprised by that. But we have seen interesting things happen before when Iowa and Wisconsin have met. And, I would not even hazard a guess as to what's going to happen in the Big Ten West this year based on some of what we've seen this year. So I will be interested in watching that game. That's a 4:00 start. So that will, I'm interested to see, because if Ohio State continues obviously on their roll, they would be meeting someone in Indianapolis, and it's always interesting to keep an eye on those teams that they could be facing.
Yeah, and as you said, it could be Wisconsin again if Iowa pulls it out and they're able to get by Minnesota. If Minnesota is able to pull the upset against Penn State, one of those three is going to be Ohio State's opponent, provided Ohio State continues on their winning ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of Ohio State fans would like some revenge on Iowa. So, maybe they'll be able to get that, but there's a huge obstacle in the way for the Hawkeyes right now, and they still have to play Minnesota as well. So it's all to play for. Michigan and Nebraska are off this week.
Yeah, and for Michigan, I know they are the lone Big Ten team. We'll talk about next week when Ohio State, when they play at Rutgers. But what was one of the most surprising things to me today is that the Big Ten slate of games for the weekend of November 16th was not announced. That the networks are exercising their 6-day option before announcing the kickoffs. So the only game that was announced, getting back to when you're talking about Michigan, was when Michigan and Michigan State play on November 16th. That's a noon kickoff. The Wolverines have an opportunity to rest up, whereas the Spartans are playing at home against a surprisingly improving Fighting Illini team.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and also Rutgers and Indiana are the other two teams off this week. So, again, not a full slate in the Big Ten as we get into the home stretch. Some of the teams are having their last bye weeks, and then we'll get back to football for everyone. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Ohio State Buckeyes, favored by 44 points. That's not an error. Favored by 44 points at home against Maryland at noon on Saturday. We'll do our predictions, our picks to click, and all that stuff coming up in just a bit. Other Ohio State news. Remember that guy, Isaiah Pryor?
I do remember Isaiah Pryor.
Yeah, he's a defensive back, and he looked like he had a pretty bright future at Ohio State, but he had entered the transfer portal, and he will be taking his talents to lovely downtown South Bend, Indiana. So he's pretty much had enough of the college football playoff.
Well, I wish him well in South Bend. From what I was reading prior to us getting on getting on for the podcast was, I guess when he was coming out of college, he played at IMG Academy down in Florida. That he had a scholarship offer from Notre Dame. Obviously, chose Ohio State and was able to contribute, some as a true freshman. I mean, he also was a starter last year, and let's face it, he had his share of difficulties in terms of coverage last year, just like the entire secondary. And then with the new coaching staff, it seemed like his role was pretty much relegated to backup duty and special teams coverage. So when the opportunity presented itself for him to be able to enter the transfer portal, he's going to graduate. He's going to get his Ohio State degree this spring, and he'll have 2 years of eligibility in South Bend for Notre Dame. Not sure what he's going to study in Notre Dame, but I wish him well. I think, based on what I understand, that with at least with the Ohio State coaching staff this year, as I said a few moments ago, that he had his challenges and difficulty in pass coverage. So it will be interesting to see what kind of role Notre Dame is going to use him, if they're going to play him as a safety, or if he's going to possibly play as a linebacker, because he certainly is. He's not poor in terms of being physical and in terms of tackling. It's just his pass coverage. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I wish him well, and hope nothing for the best, but the best for Isaiah Pryor going forward.
Yeah, good luck to Isaiah. I think that he really stood to gain a lot of playing time next year at Ohio State, but he has made the decision to enter the transfer portal. And guys don't make those decisions lightly. They don't usually make them without discussing their future with the coaching staff. So it could be that there are guys coming up behind that are potentially passing him on the depth chart. So or that at least the coaches expect that to happen. So these kids do what they feel like they need to do, and of course I'm not going to hold that against Isaiah Pryor. I didn't hold it against Joe Burrow, so can't hold it against Isaiah Pryor because that would make me a hypocrite. But Notre Dame, I mean, yeah, it's a good school, but I don't know.
Well, I just
they just got killed by Michigan. Come on.
I know they did. From what I understand, getting back to what you said a moment ago about these decisions aren't made lightly, from what I was able to gather online, and who's to say that this is just pure internet rumor, was that it certainly seems to me that this seems plausible, is that this decision to transfer from Ohio State was not met with resistance from the Ohio State coaching staff. There are no hard feelings from Isaiah Pryor or his family towards Ohio State. It's just in his best interest, as you said, the players that might be coming up, the role that was discussed, Isaiah's role on the team, as the coaches see it, not only for what would have been the remainder of 2019, but as you said, going forward in 2020. Maybe he thought, something, I'd be more successful and happier elsewhere. And as I said, the Ohio State coaching staff, to the best of my knowledge, had had no hard feelings about Isaiah transferring, and the feelings were likewise from the Pryor family towards Ohio State.
All right, Chip, you and I don't really talk a lot about recruiting, but I think it's worth noting here on the program that Ohio State got a commitment from a wide receiver with a very famous name, as Marvin Harrison Jr. Would like to be a Buckeye.
Yes, he will not be a Buckeye until 2021. So we're going to have to be patient. It's one of these things where I'm always the type that when it comes to recruiting, I follow it like you said. Like I write down the name of a player who's given his verbal commitment, but it's not as though that I can rattle off, like he's a 4-star or 5-star or whatever it might be. Like I'm not that far into it, but as you said accurately, that he is the son of Marvin Harrison, a Hall of Fame wide receiver in his own right. Based on what I understand, Marvin Harrison Jr. is teammates with another 2021 verbal commitment, and that is Kyle McCord, that they both play for St. Joseph's Prep.
St. John's Prep in Philadelphia.
Is it St. John's or St. Joseph's? Because
I believe it's St. John's.
Okay, I
could be wrong.
Okay, I thought it was
St. John's Prep is what I've got written down. I may have written it down wrong.
Because I'm looking on Marvin Harrison's Twitter profile, and his says St. Joseph's.
Oh, does it? Okay, so I may have written it down wrong because I'm old.
That's okay. That's all right. Hey, we're talking about holy men, so I mean you can't go wrong talking about holy men, and anyway, that he is.
Google tells me you're right. By the way, Google tells me that it is St. Joseph's.
Okay, but for what I understand, Marvin Harrison must be extremely talented to have earned a scholarship offer this early in the process, and the fact that Ohio State this coming year has a number of talented wide receivers who will be enrolling for the 2020 season. So the mere fact that not only is Marvin Harrison Jr. extremely talented in his own right, he certainly has to have a great deal of competitiveness and confidence in himself, because the depth chart is certainly not going to be lacking for talent with the players that Brian Hartline and the Ohio State coaching staff are doing to restock the talent that will be lost, after this coming season. Marvin Harrison is going to be a welcome addition when he does sign with Ohio State in 2021.
Yeah, and it's I believe he's the nation's number 8 ranked receiver. And that's pretty good. I'm not an expert on recruiting, but I think if you're top 10 in your position, you're probably pretty good. Absolutely.
And the mere fact that from what I was able to see, I mean, he of course, his highlights have to be interspersed with some from his father. It's a kind of thing where you can't just let the kid have his moment in the sun, but from what I understand, that he is extremely talented, but he needs to gain weight, that's not meant as a slight on him at all. Like, it's kind of, I guess, to put it in comparison to a player that Ohio State fans are familiar with, that was a similar need for Benjamin Victor when he enrolled, being very, slight of build. And the reason I bring this up is that with some of the other players who will still be on the roster when Marvin Harrison Jr. does arrive in 2021, the pressure to play him right away will be substantially lessened. The nice thing with that 4-game redshirt rule, you can play him in spot duty. You can certainly try to bulk him up as much as possible. But I think the fact that he plays with Kyle McCord, that it looks very, very promising for the Ohio State passing game, that you're going to have an incoming quarterback already have a strong rapport with a wide receiver at the caliber of Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tremendous couple of classes in a row for the wide receiver position, and already a position that's extremely deep and extremely talented for Ohio State, and guys that are just now getting on the field that are, amazing talents. They're going to be leaving right as these guys are coming in. Marvin Harrison Jr., G. Scott, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and Julian Fleming, and Mookie Cooper, and Jaden Ballard. I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, and Ohio State is not shy about, if you're good enough and talented enough and ready, you'll play. I mean, there is no, you can see already this year, Garrett Wilson has played. Now, granted, he was arguably the best wide receiver in high school football last year, but Ryan Day has shown, no hesitation whatsoever in having Garrett Wilson, playing crucial in crucial moments this year, and then another talented wide receiver who hasn't played nearly as much, but has certainly had some eyebrow raising plays just in terms of just explosive speed is Jamison Williams. So there's another guy that those two players are certainly the future for 2020, but when it comes to Marvin Harrison Jr., by that time, we're going to be trying to look like, okay, who's going to be replacing Garrett Wilson and Jamison Williams, and Marvin Harrison Jr. might fit the bill.
Absolutely. I'm excited, and when you keep getting receivers like this, you're going to keep getting quarterbacks like Justin Fields too.
Well, Well, Jack Miller, in a different capacity, Jack Miller, who is a verbal commitment for the 2020 class, he verbally committed, well over a year ago to Urban Meyer and Ryan Day, and there have been rumors about his decommitment. But Jack Miller made his official visit to Ohio State for the Wisconsin game, reaffirmed his commitment. He is arguably one of the better quarterbacks in the 2020 class. As I've said, Kyle McCord is a verbal commitment at quarterback for the 2021 class, a teammate of Marvin Harrison Jr. So I think you're on to something when you say that if you keep getting the talent that Ohio State does at wide receiver, the talented signal callers are going to follow. So it's very welcome to see.
Yeah, and when you have Ryan Day, the quarterbacks are going to want to come too, and then you get the quarterbacks, you get the wide receivers. It's like this circle that just keeps feeding on itself. Incidentally, we just mentioned Jackson Smith. Is it spelled Njigba? I don't know how it's pronounced.
I think it's pronounced Njigba.
Njigba.
I think
okay.
like you just Njigba. That's what I've heard. So if I'm mistaken, you can blame me.
Well, I think that's what Gerd said too, and I'm going to go with Gerd so I can blame it on him if I'm wrong.
Okay, I like your thinking.
Did you see what he did Friday night?
Yeah, I was going to say defying the laws of physics and one-handed catches and being able to stay in bounds. I mean, and he was one of these guys. Yeah, he's just one of the several wide receivers that you've rattled off. That it's one of these things where he doesn't have nearly the publicity of some of the other wide receivers. Like Julian Fleming is arguably the best wide receiver in the country. But when you see some of the highlights that Jackson Smith and Njigba made, you kind of wonder, okay, like who's the best wide receiver in the country? It looks like you're splitting hairs.
Right. All he did was, if you weren't aware, was he had 325 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah,
and that's
only
one game.
Only.
Oh man, it's insane. So yeah, shades of Garrett Wilson, I think, coming up in the pipeline. It's pretty exciting. The recruiting just doesn't seem to fall off, and let's hope that just continues forever.
Yeah, there was an article recently that I give credit to Ryan Day, is that he is certainly much more intensely focused on Ohio talent than Urban Meyer, at least it seems to be. But by the same token, I think, as you said a moment ago, like the talented wide receivers, the talented quarterbacks, they see the results on the field of the players that Ohio State is trotting out. And they also see what's happening at the next level in the NFL, which is, let's face it, that's the career aspiration of all these talented young men. So I think the recruiting is going to continue to be strong with Ryan Day at the helm.
It is. And that wasn't even maybe the most impressive performance by a Buckeye commit for Jackson Smith and the Jigba. Cameron Martinez went for 293 yards and 7 touchdowns and 17 carries in one half.
Yeah, I was going to say, and what's scary is nobody really even can, nobody that's close to him from the program that Muskegon in Michigan, where he plays, can really articulate what side of the ball he would be better on. I mean, you have people that say he is going to be a tremendous defensive back at the next level. And then you have people say, well, how can you take the ball out of his hands as a wide receiver? And then some people are saying, well, Ohio State shouldn't completely discount him as being maybe like an emergency quarterback. And I mean, he is going to be one of those guys that I think is going to be kind of a, maybe I don't want to call it a tug of war, but I think it's going to be some interest from both Jeff Hafley and Brian Hartline to see who's going to emerge with getting Cameron Martinez, somebody who's capable of putting up only 7 touchdowns in one half of play.
Now, he's also said he's willing to play running back, and we've had some issues with the running back recruiting of late.
We have had some issues with the running back recruiting. However, as I said a moment ago, and nothing has changed in the last minute, my faith in Ryan Day to my faith in Ryan Day to find a very capable running back for the 2020 class is very strong. I think granted, we are recording this at the beginning of November, and the early signing period is about a week before Christmas. So, a little over a month to go. I think a lot of recruiting dominoes can fall. I don't think the running back position is in dire straits by any stretch, but I certainly would not be averse to Cameron Martinez manning that position if the coaching staff felt that was in his best interest.
Well, I can't believe that a whole 60 seconds went by and you didn't completely change your opinion of Ryan Day's recruiting. I can't believe that.
Hey, I know. I was gonna say I'm not that much of a bandwagon guy.
All the variables that could come and go in 60 seconds, and you just you just shut them out and say, nope, I'm sticking to what I thought. I'm not.
Yes.
I'm not changing my mind. I am inflexible in my thinking on this. I do have a solution for Cameron Martinez.
Okay.
How about the next Chris Gamble?
It's possible. I just don't know, and this is without seeing Cameron Martinez, because I always withhold my judgment until kind of like the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, until you actually see him on the play of field, which is part of the reason why I love the spring game so much. Especially when you see the players enroll early. Like I genuinely recall being excited to see Chris Beanie Wells, and after he stiff-armed some poor guy on the opposing team, like, yeah, I think this guy's going to be okay. Anyway, I'm not sure if Cameron Martinez is going to enroll early, but I think once I saw him play, I would be much more comfortable making that, because I just know that Martinez, I mean, he's a gamer, based on the stats that you rattled off a few minutes ago. I mean, he can play anywhere he pretty much wants, and it seems as though, being a dual threat player would seem logical. I just don't know if the coaching staff is in favor of that.
Yeah, it's always curious to me how that works out, because, I mean, I don't know what percentage you would put on it, but I'd say it's a very high percentage of athletes that are excellent high school players. They tend to play on both sides of the football. and they tend to do very well on both sides of the football. They're good athletes. So it really kind of comes down to finding out what their strengths are. Now, every now and then you get a guy whose strengths are everything. Like everything's a strength. He can, and Chris Gamble was one of those guys. And I think that if you have a guy who can affect a game 30 plays a game and have 15 of them be on offense and 15 of them be on defense, I think that's a pretty good thing to do.
Yeah, I just think this is just my personal belief is I think every one of these guys, depending on the position, of course, I think kind of where they earn their playing time is through special teams play, in terms of their coverage and
right.
All that. So who's to say that Cameron Martinez, being a terrific gunner on kickoff and punt coverage, also, hey, you've earned an opportunity to possibly return punts or return kickoffs, or and kind of works his way up. So I think you might be onto something.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll have to be patient to see how it all works out, because that's the future, but this is the now, Chip. We have to live in the now, as they said on Wayne's World. And we will live in the now as Ohio State will play Maryland on Saturday at 12 noon. And if you did not set your clock back, you might be in a little bit of trouble when you turn on the TV this Saturday. So the Maryland defense, Chip, I've alluded to this already, is ranked in total defense in the country not very high.
Yeah, it's
85th actually is where they are in team total defense. 85th.
Well, the reason why I'm chuckling is we were talking earlier in the podcast about how far Northwestern has fallen in less than a calendar year. And it was about a year ago at this time, give or take, that Ohio State escaped from Maryland with a 1-point win, and that seems like for forever, because the Maryland team, not that was a good Maryland team by any stretch. I mean, I think they finished 5-7 last year. They didn't make it to a bowl game, but the Ohio State offense that we've been seeing, I mean, they've been rolling over opponents with much better defenses, as you said. Now they're going up against an opponent at home that ranks 85th. I think this is going to be one of these things where it might get ugly very, very quickly.
Let me tell you about the Maryland offense, Chip. The Maryland offense, Chip, total offense is rated 86th in the country.
Okay, so we're not making progress. So,
keep in mind those first couple of weeks, Maryland was like probably leading the country in total offense.
I've said this before in reference to Michigan about false confidence, because with Maryland, they started out, as you said, 2-0. They looked positively, impossible to stop, and then everything just started to fall apart. So watching Maryland on Saturday against Michigan, just to reiterate this point, they seemed much better when they were running the ball than when they tried to throw. But I'm not sure what they're going to be able to do, at least in terms of sustainability, against Ohio State on Saturday afternoon.
Let me tell you a very sad story, Chip, about the big. I'm going to tell you a sad story. I don't want to bring down the podcast, but Maryland's 86th ranked offense ranks ahead of Purdue, Michigan State, Rutgers, Illinois, and Northwestern. That's not good. That's not good for the conference, Chip. That's really not good.
No, it's not. So you rattled off, correct me if I'm mistaken, out of all of those opponents, Michigan State and Northwestern are the only teams that let me rephrase this, that Maryland is better than Michigan State and Northwestern, correct?
On offense, yes.
On offense, and Ohio State, you saw what Ohio State did to them when it came to the Buckeyes defense being able to shut down those opposing offenses. Mm-hmm. So it just makes should give everyone an idea as to why Vegas has this as a 44-point spread in favor of the Buckeyes.
Yeah, it looks to be a pretty big mismatch if you look at it. Just based on rankings alone, you've got Ohio State's 6th nationally ranked offense against the 85th ranked defense. You've got Ohio State's barely 2nd in the country defense going up against the 86th ranked offense. Chip, what do you got for a score prediction for this one?
All right, this is going to be, and I'm not trying to sound cocky. I know it's going to come across as soon as I say this, but I really think Ohio State's going to have to work to keep this, under 60 points. So I'm going to go Ohio State 56, Maryland 7. And I think Ohio State, it's going to be tough for those talented reserves when they come in not to be able to have their way against Maryland.
Yeah, this is a game where if Thayer Munford is banged up, don't play him.
Oh yeah.
There's no reason to risk guys that are dinged in this type of game. The backup should be okay. Maryland's leading rusher, Chip, is Javon Leake, a junior running back. He's got 581 yards on the season, 7 touchdowns. Anthony McFarland Jr. just behind him with 438 yards and also 7 touchdowns. So they like to run the football. Those are the two guys that normally get it. They don't pass the ball particularly well. Josh Jackson seems to be their best quarterback in terms of throwing and potentially sometimes running it. But he's only completing 49.7% of his passes. He has 10 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And again, you go back to those first couple of games where Maryland looked like a world-beating offense. If you throw out the first 2 games, it's probably not looking that good for their quarterbacking situation.
No, and I think this is also where they're going to be trying to not shatter the confidence of their talented freshman quarterback who played sparingly against Michigan. I think we'll see him at some point. I just don't know when they want that to happen. I would guess that would happen as soon as Ohio State pulls their starters, which I believe will be at the beginning of the third quarter.
So Lance Lejeune is 1 of 2 this season passing for 7 yards. No touchdowns, no interceptions. But he's more of a runner. At least he had been the other day when I saw him. He's played in 2 games, and he's carried the ball 9 times for 69 yards. So that's a 7.67 yard average. That's what he does well.
Yeah, I think you want to get him some playing time, but as I said, you don't want to shatter his confidence having him come in against Ohio State because when I watched him against Michigan, now granted, I mean, Maryland, they were behind the entire time, but they were, as we discussed earlier, they were able to move the ball on the Wolverines. Like that game was still in doubt in the first half, and that's when I saw him playing. I'm not sure they're going to have that luxury against Ohio State.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go out and predict a big game for the Maryland Terrapins' 3rd leading tackler, linebacker Keandre Jones.
Yes,
he has 45 tackles on the season. He's like I said, he's 3rd on the team in tackles. He'll be jacked up to play in the shoe, and I think it's going to be a long day for him and his mates, but I think he'll make some plays.
I have no doubt, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of reaction he gets from his former teammates.
Yeah, so again, like most teams, the linebackers tend to get the majority of the tackles for Maryland. Allende Alay is the leading tackler, 65 tackles, 40 solos. The second leading tackler is a defensive back, Antoine Brooks. with 57. Then Keandre Jones, a linebacker, Chance Campbell, a linebacker, Isaiah Davis, a linebacker, and so on and so forth. Their D-line is not making a lot of tackles. So, and I don't think that's going to happen on Saturday. I think that J.K. Dobbins is going to get to that second level quite a bit. And I am going to say, you said 56-7. I am going to say 59-6.
Interesting.
Yeah, and honestly, I really want to pick more than 60. I think they probably will score more than. If they want to score 70, they'll score 70.
If they want to, but I don't. You want to talk about a horror show? A couple weeks after Halloween, that's when Ohio State goes to Rutgers next week. That's trying to keep that under 70 is going to be a monumental task. But that's for next week's show.
Right. I think though there is the potential for Ohio State to take this game too lightly, and maybe the game ends up a little closer than we expect it to. I don't think it'll be close, but I think it's noteworthy that both of us, despite a 44-point spread, we both picked the Buckeyes to cover.
Yeah, I mean, I can only, speaking for myself, when it came to the Ohio State-Miami game earlier this year, my rationale for picking the final score the way I did is simply based on the fact that when these guys get in, the backups, that is, we were talking earlier about, a lot of the talent that's in reserve. You can't. I don't like throwing for the end zone when the game's well decided, but by the same token, you have to run your offense, and that means Chugginoff and Gunnar Hoke, they have to throw the ball, and if the receivers are able to break for a long play that results in a touchdown, I don't have a problem with that. So I just think it's going to be really difficult for the talent that's on Ohio State's team to not succeed when they're going up against a defense that is as challenged as Maryland's.
Yeah, and the other part of that too is when your backups are on the field. I mean, like you said, they got to run the plays that are called. But if the play is called and the defense lines up a certain way, then the receivers have to run a certain route. Now, if the defense lines up in a certain way, they might have to run a post, or they might have to run, straight down the field, and that's how you get those big plays. Because if they're open and they're the first read, then that's where Chugginoff and Hoke are supposed to throw the football. So it's not great optics, but I mean, if there's a pass play called and the defense lines up a certain way and it forces the receivers to run a particular route, then it forces the quarterback to make their reads and go through the progressions. And if their guy's open, he throws it. It is a chain reaction that ends up going, they're running up the score.
Yeah, like I said, I think Ohio State, when we get to our picks, like I said, I'm going to probably go off the beaten path with that, because I just think we're going to see a lot more of the backups on Saturday than I think people probably realize.
All right, so let's go to that. Let's go with our picks to click, and I let you do offense first last time, so this time you will start with your defensive pick to click.
All right, I said it a moment ago, and I think Ohio State defensively is going to be playing their backups substantially in the second half. No point in getting starters injured. You will also want to get your backups some much needed and desired game time experience. So I'm going to go with backup linebacker Dallas Gant.
All right. And you're not going to believe me, but you took my guy again.
See, it's to your kindness and friendliness and allowing me to go first.
Yeah, I always swap it out. You get to go first on either offense or defense, and then I get to do the other one first. So it's fair, and it alternates. But I was thinking, there's no way he's picking Dallas Gant.
Okay, do you want me to choose somebody different?
No.
Okay.
This is your prerogative, man. This is you.
Okay.
Go,
okay.
Like if you go first in chess, you move where you move the guy you want to move, right?
Okay, that's right.
All right. So I will say I'm going to also go with the backup because why not? I mean, let's make it interesting. I mean, is it really going to be a stretch if Chase Young has a good day? Is it really going to be a stretch if Malik Harrison has a good day? I don't think so. I think you expect that, but I also think you're going to see them off the field early. So I'm going to go with somebody a little unconventional. I'm going to say Amir Reap.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Very good.
So that brings us to the offensive side of the football, and I know it's easy to go to the backups, but I really think that there's a guy that Ohio State wants to get going, and he hasn't gotten going, and I'm going to stick with him. I picked him last week, and it's KJ Hill.
Okay.
So,
I'm going to stick with the backup theme simply because I really do believe that with the big games at the end of November and Ohio State, they're not going to be so pompous as to not play their starters. I think that you have to keep them, focused and game ready. But I do believe that after the half, you want to pull people out to preserve their health. So along those lines, even though he is not a starter the way that he's been performing, Master T, in my estimation, would qualify as being kind of that next starter, after J.K. Dobbins.
right.
With that logic, I'm going to go with freshman Marcus Crowley, which I'm sure that will allow you to get out your Blizzard of Oz album, if I'm correct, and you can play that if he has the game that I anticipate that he will. I'm not trying to suggest that Ohio State's coaches don't care about Marcus Crowley's health, but I think you would rather give him. He's already exhausted his year of eligibility anyway. Mm-hmm. He's already gone beyond that 4-game threshold. So why not load him up in the second half? The game's going to be well in hand. And okay, let's give Mr. Crowley at least 20 carries, give or take, and see what he does with them.
Mr. Crowley. Yes, absolutely. It's a good pick because at first I thought you were taking Master Teague, and I thought, well, he's probably going to get 150 yards.
I have no doubt. Right, I have no doubt. I have no doubt that Master Teague's going to have a great game too. I just think, okay, it's the same thing. It's like, all right, good job. Hit the showers. I know that they don't do that, but I'm just thinking, the cliche. It's like, all right, you're good, you're fine. Rest up. And then. I think it's the Mr. Crowley show, as you saying.
Mm-hmm. What does it mean does it mean anything, Chip, if Ohio State and Maryland is closer than Michigan, Maryland?
Maybe, but I'm not going to worry about that. I think I'm of the mindset that you've got everything in front of you, and that being, the one thing that Ohio State can control is winning or contending for the Big Ten championship. And, if you win by, 21 points versus, like the 31 that Michigan did, I'm sure the pollsters will look at it differently. But, I think Ohio State, as you said, I think offensively and defensively, they're going to be too much. I mean, Crowley, let's face it. We're all the players, with the exception of KJ Hill, Crowley, Gant, Amir Reap, they would all be starting on this Maryland team. Mm-hmm. Every single one of them. So that's why I think the talent gap between the two teams is so much that I do think Ohio State will win comfortably.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how Ohio State approaches this, because on the one hand, you've got back-to-back Big Ten doormats in the East that you're facing. But on the other hand, there might be some residual anger about last year's Maryland game, where it ended up going down to the wire, and the Buckeyes may feel like they have something to prove in this game, which, I mean, for Maryland's sake, that would be extremely devastating.
Yeah, that Maryland loss, or almost loss, I should say. I mean, they certainly had every reason to be kicking themselves last year because that game was, I mean, it was theirs. They outplayed Ohio State. I'll say it. They outplayed Ohio State for the vast majority of that game. I know Ohio State came up on the winning side of the ledger, but it was only by sheer grit and sheer luck that Ohio State was able to get out of there, because of a poorly thrown pass on a 2-point conversion. Ohio State's season would have been radically different. Maryland, I think they're Mike Loxley. I think give him some time with the recruiting side of things. I think he'll get Maryland to be more competitive within the Big Ten East. It's just this kind of game against a powerhouse like Ohio State is just part of the process that Loxley and the Maryland team and fans have to just kind of bite their lip and just kind of, all right, we'll see if we can be more competitive like we were in 2018 when Ohio State, comes to visit us in 2020.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Chip, we will get back together next week. We will discuss Ohio State and Maryland. We'll take a look at the other Big Ten results and any other news that comes out of this week. And I think it's absolutely we're in the final 4 games. Trying to think of what I want to say here, and it's a must that we savor every one of these last 4 games in the regular season because this season is winding down, and we don't know what's going to happen as far as the postseason at this point as we head into this stretch. So we have to savor this because we're really now in the we're beyond the halfway mark. We're beyond we're at the 2/3 mark of the regular season, and it's the final 4 regular season games, and it's going to be gone before you know it. So hold on to it, savor it, and really, allow yourself to enjoy it. Don't I'll be grumpy for everybody with my grumpy old Buckeye column. You guys relax and enjoy it and have fun. Don't get upset if the defense gives up a 20-yard pass play. Just chill out and just enjoy this team for what it is.
Very well said. I agree.
All right. And, you and I, we did record early last week, but I actually ended up putting it up late. So instead of going up Tuesday, last week's show didn't go up Tuesday morning like it normally does. It didn't go up till 8 at night. So I apologize for that. That's on me. There's some stuff that came up. So we will hopefully not have that happen again because as soon as you and I are done, Chip, I'm going to put this together and get it scheduled. But I wanted to apologize for that. But I do also want to say that, yeah, we were right. We were correct in our prediction that J.K. Dobbins and Chase Young would be offensive and defensive players of the week. In fact, they were in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, we're glad that the voting by in terms of the results that we had predicted that they followed could only be the most logical outcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unheard of for an Ohio State player to have a huge day and then get either beaten or get co-player of the week with, somebody from like Minnesota playing, Ball State on an off week. It's not unheard of. It happens.
Yeah, I know. Who's to say? Let's not jinx ourselves, but who's to say if somebody on like Rodney Smith of Minnesota has a big game against Penn State, you know what I mean? Like something like that. If he's the player of the week after this coming weekend, who's to say? It's like it certainly seems as though Ohio State does not get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the player of the week voting.
Right, and I think it's the conference saying, I mean, we could give it to a Buckeye every week, so we're not going to give it to Buckeyes unless we have to, kind of thing. Kind of like they do with Coach of the Year. By the way, the Coach of the Year this year, whoever's going to finish ahead of Ryan Day will either be probably P.J. Fleck at this point, or do you see anybody else maybe that's in that discussion?
The only I will say this is that I think it comes down to how the Big Ten East finishes up. Who's to say that James Franklin wouldn't possibly, depending on if Penn State were able to win the Big Ten East. But I would certainly think that P.J. Fleck would have to be the favorite for the Big Ten Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that's probably because they're undefeated. Teams that weren't expected to do well and do well. It's like, oh well, obviously it's a great coaching job because we didn't expect them to do well. But sometimes, I can't imagine. Like, granted, the players that were left behind when Urban Meyer retired were great players. But it's still a big job to take over and be the coach for the first season anywhere.
Agreed, especially for a somebody without prior head coaching experience. You just referenced Urban Meyer leaving behind a talented roster, and he did. Make no mistake about it. I mean, we were talking about recruiting earlier in the podcast. And Urban Meyer certainly earned his reputation for being a tremendous evaluator of talent, and the recruiting class rankings reflect that. And one thing I will say about Urban Meyer is that when he walked in, now granted, he took over for Luke Fickell, who was in that interim position, but it wasn't as though he was devoid of talent either. Like Jim
Right.
Tressel had left behind. I mean, a lot of basically that 2012 team was almost exclusively made up of players that Jim Tressel left behind for Urban Meyer. So, yeah, like you said, I think I think a lot of people just kind of overlook the idea of, all right, yeah, you can have talented players, but if you can't develop them and motivate them and coach them, sometimes the results on the field are not what you expect, or certainly what you hope. I mean, I will tell you, there's a certain program down in Tallahassee that's kind of resembling a dumpster fire that had a lot of highly talented and recruited players that are looking for a new coach after only 2 years.
Absolutely, yeah. Willie Taggart getting fired midweek, or not even midweek, early in the week after losing to Miami, and yeah, it was what was there, about a year and a half, a year and 2/3?
Yeah. I mean, so what is it? 17 million plus. I've been trying to keep an eye on what it said online. I think it's going to be close to $20 million that Florida State's going to have to fork over in terms of the buyout. So it's an ugly situation, but to the larger point being that, sometimes you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't have the right person coaching and motivating and developing, it means nothing.
How blessed is your life, Chip, if you are getting paid $17 million to go away?
I could take it.
Yeah,
I would take it.
I would leave for a lot less than that, actually.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was going to say, since I have no pride or shame for that matter, yeah, I could go for certainly less.
Absolutely. All right, Chip. Well, we'll be back to do this next week. We'll see what happens. I wonder, though, if Ohio State goes undefeated and is the only Big Ten team to go undefeated, if P.J. Fleck still beats out Ryan Day, or if maybe even Tom Allen sneaks in there and takes it.
That's a good one. I never thought about Tom Allen and Lovie Smith either. There's another possibility.
So we just know it's usually not a Buckeye. I mean, it hasn't been one since what, Earl Bruce?
Yeah, it would be 40 years.
So obviously we don't have any good coaching at Ohio State.
No, just not at all.
Oh, man. All right. Chip, where can folks find you online?
They can find me on Twitter at Chip Minnick. My last name is spelled Minnicch. And like Michael, I'm a contributor for the Ozone, specifically on the Hayes and Cannon section. And I'm also a contributor for Athlon Sports.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan, MIKE36FAN. Please hit me or Chip up with the hashtag SBP mailbag if you want to ask us anything, and we'll answer it on the air here on the Silver Bullets podcast. You can hit us up on Twitter. You can even use that hashtag at our Silver Bullets podcast Twitter, which is SILVR Bullets Pod. Don't put the E in silver, and it's just Silver Bullets Pod without the E in silver, and that's the Twitter handle for the show. But use that hashtag SBP Mailbag, which stands for Silver Bullets Podcast Mailbag, and we will be happy to answer your questions on the air. We don't have any questions this week, Chip, so we won't answer any of them.
Okay, that's all right, but hopefully people will be inspired by our discussion about the Big Ten Coach of the Year and kind of what we were talking about in terms of the backup players, all that kind of stuff.
I think we just have to stop being so thorough in these podcasts, and then it will leave some room for people to ask more questions.
That's a good point.
I think we're just I think victims of our own success.
Maybe.
I don't know if anybody's buying it, but I'm selling it. Anyway, also you can find me at theozone.net in the Hayes and Cannon section as the grumpy old Buckeye. Every week after the game, the day after the game, I post a grumpy old Buckeye and tell you all the things that bothered me during the game. And, even when there's not a whole lot to gripe about, I find stuff anyway because that's the way I am. And also you can read some of my non-sports stuff, or even sometimes some sports stuff, at michaellikestowrite.com. This week I did a little recap of the Joker movie, Chip. Have you seen that?
I have not. My wife and twin sons went on, what was it? Saturday? I think it was Saturday. Yeah, they went. They went while I was watching Michigan and Maryland.
Well, I hope your sons are old enough for it was a really bleak movie.
Yeah, they enjoyed it. I mean, they're obviously they're not of legal age to go by themselves, and they had expressed an interest in it. And my wife said it was very disturbing. So.
It was. So you can read my recap of the movie and my overall thoughts on it at michaellikestowrite.com, and I would be very pleased if you would leave some comments and tell me what you thought. So that'll do it, Chip. We'll be back next week with an all-new Silver Bullets podcast. We will talk about the Maryland-Ohio State game. We will preview Rutgers, and who wouldn't be excited about that preview?
Probably Tom Orr, because he's dreading that drive.
Well, maybe Tom could listen to our preview on the drive out there.
Maybe. But then again, I think that's, we don't want to take away from what he and Gerd contribute for the Ozone.
Oh, well, I'm not taking anything away from them. I'm just saying I don't think they generally podcast while they're driving, so they could actually have time to listen to our podcast.
That's true.
Yeah. So, speaking of which, check out all the other shows on the Ozone Radio Network. The Buckeye Weekly is on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and on game days they do preview and post-game shows, and you can hear the Buckeye Sloopcast on Mondays and Fridays. That about cover it?
Good shows. Yeah. Good shows all.
Yeah, all good shows. Check them all out. And we thank you for listening, and we will see you next week. Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!